Hi, I'm ED-SKaR, and recently I painted a couple of the ships from Kings of War Armada. And I don't want to say that I rushed through them, but I sort of rushed through them. I painted them with very simple techniques, and they came out looking really cool. However, when you look a little closer, you can see that, yeah, my paintwork is not exactly excellent. And so today I have another couple of ships from the set, and I'd like to take a little bit more time over them. I'm not going to spend quite as much time talking about how to build and paint, but I will start with pointing out the parts that you need for these two ships.
The Basellion GurPanther is slightly harder to identify than the Eloy I painted last time. To pick it out, the ship's hull does have some small cat heads on the back and two circle recesses in the prow. If we find the sprue marked GP3 for Ger Panther 3, we see that there are two pegs that line up. We also have GP1 and GP2 for the rest of the sails. The panther heads around the poop deck, and particularly the swivel guns on the inside here, have some quite difficult to remove sprue and flashing. I recommend a very sharp pointed knife, a lot of care, and a lot of patience. The Orc Bloodrunner is slightly easier to identify. It has a taller stern than the Hammerfist with a skull, and the prow has one large square connection point. Important parts for the ship are the prow drill piece, which is unmarked on the sprue, and then we have BR1 for the weapons, BR2 for the masts, and 3 and 4 are the sails. Assembling the Ger Panther is pretty straightforward. The sails assemble in the same way as the Eloy. With the Orcs, there are some specifics with the wooden pieces. This cross-deck cannon piece has a slight angle to the top, which should point rearward as with the slope of the main deck. And the cannon ports are shaped to only go in one way, with the door piece at the top. The sails are the same as the Hammerfist, but in this case no emblem. If you want more detail in how to assemble or clean these parts, I recommend watching my original video where I go into a little more detail. So let's get cracking with painting the hull from the Orc Bloodrunner. Whilst I want to paint it better than the Hammerfist, I want it to be similar enough in the tones so that it will visually match on the battlefield. To achieve this, my wood technique on the Hammerfist will form the basic for my wood here. Previously I painted a dark brown with a black wash, and that's all. As I mentioned, I painted the first ships with simple techniques. Before I put the wash on the Bloodrunner, I wanted to add some variety, some visual interest. To achieve this, I will pick out some of the wooden planks with a lighter brown. This is to bring in some of the sculpted details that stylize the Orc ships. Orcs aren't too fussy about having just the right shade of tree to repair their ships. Rather, their engineers and repair crews are far more capable to use a far wider supply of materials for repairs. Better your own crew can hack down a tree and fix the ship rather than having to go back to port, which can take a lot longer and end up being more expensive. I also added a quick highlight by dry brushing another light brown over the top just before the wash to pick out every one of the planks in just a tiny bit on the upper edge. The wash then caused me a little bit of an issue. I mentioned in my first video that an acrylic wash is just a watered down acrylic paint, which is a little bit of a simplification. A properly mixed wash will contain some extra medium so that the pigment doesn't separate, and some surfactant to make it flow more easily. There's a few videos around on how to make such mixes. Midwinter Minis and Blackmagic Craft have both done that. I tend to do my mix slightly differently to these, in that mine ends up nearly as a glaze. And that is the cause of my issue. All of my work picking out all of the different planks was almost obliterated when everything formed this uniform glazed wood. So I went round again and picked out the edges of those planks to bring them out. I also went over some of the rivets with silver, as well as the horns that I missed completely on the Hammerfist. These horns and the Bloodrunner's skull got a tan highlighted several times up to a nearly pure white. The skull here is probably the best painted part of this model, but it's also the least visible once the sails are fitted. Painting the Ger Panther's hull was very much like my previous video, tan with a brown wash, and like the Bloodrunner, I'm doing some extra flair. Most importantly is the embellishments under the figurehead, which I all but ignored on the Eloy, although I really liked the wood effects there. I wanted to bring in some of the more sample paint scheme style that Mantic show in their own photographs, starting here with some bright green, but also in specific alternate wood colourings. Here I lean away from the competent quick engineering of the Orcs and far more into the artistic intent with where I place the alternate wood colour. Only in exactly the right place, even if it takes more resources to do, even if it's more expensive to lay down the ship and far more difficult to repair. There's gold pantheads all over this ship after all, and if it costs this much to build it, it's gonna have premium woodwork. And speaking of the gold, I put a lot of gold on this model. Gold figurehead, gold banding, gold panther gargoyles, gold panel thingings on the side. I honestly thought these were gun ports, but the Ger Panther isn't that heavily armed. They're just extra fancy bits, I guess. And now for the wash, which once again didn't quite do what I wanted it to. A running theme of washes, and the wood ended up darker than the Eloy, even though it is the same paint and the same wash. Well, to brighten it back up and to add some extra embellishment to the hull, I went back with a sort of edge highlight. Not a true edge highlight, because the space between the planks is far too small to lay my brush down on the edges with any degree of success, and so it ended up as more of a bordering line than an edge highlight, and I put this on the front and top sides of the side planks, and the front and port side of the planks on the deck, just to imply a direction of light from the front port. I feel like the next logical step is for me to wet blend a highlight on every single plank on the ship separately. Now that sounds like it's a ton of work. Moving on to getting these ships moving with some sails and back to the Bloodrunner. I went all pro painter mode and gave the sails a zenithal highlight, which I totally ignored and painted the sails how I felt like at the time. There was a little red on my palette, but I didn't really like the difficulties that I had with the red paint before, so I chose blue sails. But red mixes with blue to make purple, and purple would be a really nice shadow colour for the blue on the sails. So I used all the red paint there to make a shadow purple under the billow of each of the sails. I continued to base coat the rest of the sail with just a plain dark blue. After this I mixed in a lighter blue and got stuck in with highlights. Interestingly, as there are 4 sail pieces, each one was dry as I got back for the next layer. Usually I'd kick in here with some drivel about wet blending, but I felt the call for just simple layered highlights instead. This led to a more consistent look over the 4 sails, but harsher colour borders between each layer. Many people who have seen this model have commented the harsh transitions, but I feel it brings a nice bright sunlight effect. I guess I'm easier to please than most. The Ger Panther's sails carried on the theme of this video. Not only is it similar to my previous video, but better, it also caused a whole bunch of issues. I tried highlighting further up into white than I had with the Eloy, and ended up with a horribly chalky look. After a few attempts at trying to fix this, I remembered that I have some artist's white ink, which, if I'm honest, I haven't used anywhere near enough to know how it behaves, and you can see where this is going. When I put it on, it didn't behave how I wanted it to. In this case, I nearly obliterated all of the layering that I had done up to this point. Well, to recover this, I brought back my brown wash, which, as I said, is sort of a glaze consistency-ish, and I lined through the separations of the sails. I mixed in some of the tan base coat into the wash for another layer, and that managed to get the look just about close enough. Not perfect, but it's good enough. Finally, the emblem gets the same green as the hull details, and then both ships can be assembled.
So there we go, another couple of these tiny ships completed, and I think I've done a much better job at it. Maybe not necessarily the best work I've ever done, or the most impressive that these ships have ever been painted, but certainly better than my original attempts in my last video. But if you have any comments about the techniques I've used, or if you have any suggestions for which ship I should paint next, please leave them in the comment section below, and also on your way past you'll see the description, which has a whole bunch of links to the other things that I tend to get up to. As well as a donation link to throw a few pennies my way. I am trying to get a better camera to improve the quality of my videos. And for everyone else, thank you very much for watching. I'm ED-SKaR, and I always will be.